Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, aye. Ms. Collins, no. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. McCain? Mr. McCain? No. Mrs. Feinstein? Aye.
Ready to roll.
That's the other part. That could be very problematic for, certainly for me, and I think probably for them. Because if they want some kind of carbon, tax, limitation, right? I mean, it could be a tough case. Which, I mean, you could end up without, again, without. Well, we've got somewhere between 10 and 15, wherever you need 15.
Mr. Inhofe, no.
So just, I mean, you're cognizant if we're, yeah, we might have some, but when push comes to shove.
Mr. Portman, no.
So, you know, that goes. As you know.
We don't actually have an order for water.
No, we're in November.
Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Heller? Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Blunt? No. Mr. Moran? No. Mr. Kirk? Mr. Kirk? No. Mr. Enzi? No. Mr. Thune? Mr. Thune? No. Mr. Cornyn? Mr. Cornyn? No. Mr. Carper? Aye. Mr. Graham? No.
He doesn't love us.
Mr. Reed? Order. Oh.
Majority Leader?
Mr. Reed of Nevada? No.
Okay, we're going to play the vote.
You said roll it.
Anyway, you're the new guy.
Mr. Sessions? Mr. Sessions? No.
Any other senators wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote? If not, on this vote, the ayes are 51 and the nays are 41. 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn have not voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam President,
Majority Leader?
I enter a motion to reconsider the vote by which cloture was not invoked on the nomination of Halligan.
The motion is entered.
Madam President, we are now going to move to the Brennan matter, we believe. The Republican leader and I are trying to work something out. I've had numerous contacts from everybody about the problems with the weather. And what we're going to try to do is get an agreement to move forward on Brennan and finish it today. I don't know if we can do that, but that's what we're trying to do. So in the meantime, I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Senator from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that to speak as if in morning business and to speak for up to 10 minutes, and that Senator Inhofe, senior senator from Oklahoma, be given 20 minutes after I speak.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to recognize the lasting contributions of 80 courageous Americans.
Order, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to recognize the lasting contributions for 80 courageous Americans who participated in the Doolittle raid, our nation's first offensive action on Japan's soil during the Second World War. I'm glad to have Senator Boozman as the lead Republican of an effort to ensure that these men have the recognition that they deserve. Together we introduced Senate Bill 381, which will award the surviving airmen known as the Doolittle Raiders with the Congressional Gold Medal. Senator Boozman's collaboration reiterates the bipartisan support for our veterans that it endures in this body. Joining us as original co-sponsors are Senators Murray and Tester, and Baucus and Nelson, Senator Cantwell, and Senator Schatz. As chairman of the Senate Veterans Committee during the last session, Senator Murray also co-sponsored last year's resolution. We're especially grateful for her leadership. Our colleague, Senator Lautenberg, the sole World War II veteran serving the Senate, is also a co-sponsor. Some 16 million Americans served this country during World War II. These survivors have earned the respect of a grateful nation. Now is the time for us to act to honor them. On April 18, 1942, 80 American airmen volunteered for an unknown assignment. Their sons and their fathers and their brothers accepted what they only knew to be, and I quote, an extremely hazardous mission. They were led by Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Doolittle, a one-time flight instructor at Wright Field in my home state in Dayton, Ohio. He also studied at Kelly Field and McCook Field in Ohio. The Doolittle raid was the first time the Army Air Corps and the Navy collaborated in a tactical mission. These pilots flew 16 U.S. Army Air Corps B-25 Mitchell bombers from the deck of the USS Hornet into combat, a feat that had never before been attempted. On the morning of the raid, the USS Hornet was discovered by Japanese picket ships. Fearing that the mission might be compromised, the raiders launched 170 miles earlier than planned. The earlier launch meant that these men now had to travel over 650 miles to their intended targets, leaving them with the possibility of running out of enough fuel to land beyond the Japanese lines in occupied China. Accepting this choice meant the raiders would almost certainly have to crash land or bail out either above Japanese-occupied China or over the home islands of Japan. Any survivor would certainly be subjected to imprisonment or torture or death. After reaching their targets, 15 of the bombers continued to China, while the 16th, whose plane was dangerously low on fuel, headed to Russia. The total distance traveled by the raiders was about 2,200 nautical miles over a period of 13 hours, making it the longest combat mission ever flown in a B-25 during the war. Of the 80 raiders who launched that day, 8 were captured, 3 of them executed, 1 died of disease. 4 of these prisoners survived and returned home after the war. Of the original 84 are still with us. They're residents of Montana, Texas, Tennessee, and Washington State. There was a 5th, Major Tom Griffin of Cincinnati, Ohio, on the evening of February 26th, just a week ago.
Take your conversations out of the chamber. Senate will be in order.
Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from Ohio.
Just last week, on the evening of February 26th, the date I introduced this legislation, Major Griffin of Cincinnati passed away, surrounded by family and friends. His family lost a loved one. Our nation lost a hero. The remaining 4 raiders will be commemorating the 71st anniversary of this raid this coming April in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Now is the time to award these survivors the Congressional Medal. Their valor, their skill, their courage proved invaluable to the morale of our country on that day more than 70 years ago, and the eventual defeat of Japan in the Second World War. These men continue to remind us of the quiet determination and that uncommon valor in the face of sure danger. I humbly ask that my colleagues join us in this bill in honoring the Doolittle Raiders. Thank you, Madam President. I yield to Senator Inhofe.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
We'll leave this here so we can time it. Madam President, since being elected, President Obama has been talking about the virtues of our nation's potential to achieve domestic energy independence. Now, at the State of the Union message just a few days ago, he said, and this is a quote, he said, "After years of talking about it, we are finally poised to control our own energy future." Madam President, this is something I've been saying now for years. We already have control of the energy future. The problem is we have an administration that has not allowed us to exploit our own capabilities in terms of developing the natural resources that we have. In fact, we are the only country in the world that doesn't develop its own resources. The President's budget, he's proposed to kill certain tax provisions that specifically hurt, that are there, he says, for the oil and gas industry. This is not the case. Now, I'd like to mention these because no one ever talks about this. No one ever talks about the fact that it's
Senate will be in order.
That it has specific provisions in his own budget, and I'll mention just 3 of them. Intangible drilling costs, they're called IDCs. It's a provision that simply allows producers to deduct from their revenue the cost of drilling. Well, you know, revenue, you pay taxes on net revenue. Well, that's net of the expenses it takes to develop the revenue. Every business is allowed to deduct ordinary and necessary business expenses, and IDCs are exactly that for the oil and gas industry. In other words, the cost of drilling should be deducted, because a lot of times they drill and they don't produce anything. And so this is something that everyone else has, and we should be having also in the oil industry. Now, if he gets rid of this, the tax increase would be $13.9 billion over the 10-year period that we've been talking about. This is interesting because that is not a tax that would be paid by them. It would go into the increased cost of energy. Now, we stopped that. We stopped that provision from becoming a reality, but it was in the president's budget. The second is called percentage depletion. Percentage depletion is simply a way that the tax code has allowed oil and gas producers to account for the reduction in the value of their reserves. Let's say they are fortunate and they produce oil, and that's going to be income that will go to them. But as that is depleted, then that is the value of that has been depleted also. And so the percentage depletion has been on the books as long as we've had the industry. If he were successful in doing that on percentage depletion, then that would be about an $11.5 billion tax increase on the energy that we use in this country. The last thing I'll mention, there are two more about it. I just mentioned the other one. It's called Section 199. Section 199 is the manufacturer's tax deduction. It allows all manufacturers, including farmers, filmmakers, and the rest of them, to take a small deduction in their taxes because they create products here in America. But the president has always proposed to cancel this out, but only for the oil and gas industry, not for anybody else. Everybody else would have that same advantage. Again, if you were successful in doing this, it would increase the cost of energy by $11.6 billion over that 10-year period. The president's proposal to increase these taxes would prevent the industry from reaching its true potential. And this is when we talk about what we have out there that we can do and how we can get get it done today real quickly. A recent CRS, Congressional Review Society, report stated that the United States has the largest combined resources of oil, natural gas, and coal of any country in the world. We have more than Saudi Arabia, China, and Canada combined. Yet we are the only nation, as I said, and the only nation in the world that doesn't allow ourselves to exploit our own resources. Now, fortunately, oil and gas activities have increased over the past years, but as much as the president may want to claim credit for this, he has no standing to do so because, as I mentioned, the tax provisions that he's proposed in his budget have been very negative toward oil and gas. Last year, we hit a 15-year high in oil production, producing an average of 6.4 million barrels a day, which it was 800,000 barrels per day more than in 2011. This increase is staggering, and it's a result of amazing advancements in oil and gas production technologies. We're talking about things like horizontal drilling, like hydraulic fracturing. These are things that have helped us do this. To get the oil and gas out of tight formations. Nearly all of this increase has occurred on state and private lands. CRS confirmed a year ago that about 96%, this is critical. Again, I've said it twice already, that we're the only country that doesn't develop its own resources. 96% of the increase that we've had, or essentially all of the increase in oil and gas production since 2007, took place on non-federal lands. That means that beyond the reach of the president's hands. In other words, he can't stop the private land production, but he can the public land. Now, adding to that, it was just released yesterday, and that's why I wanted to make this point today. Yesterday, that the oil production on all federal lands, including onshore and offshore, declined last year, the second year in a row, falling from 632 million barrels in 2011 to right at 600 million barrels in 2012. So the 800,000 barrels per day increase we saw last year took place solely on private lands, none of it on public lands. We had a reduction in this boom time that we're having right now on that which the president has control over, the federal lands. We've actually had a reduction. And this makes sense given what we know about oil and gas permitting on federal lands. It can still take 300 days to get a permit to drill. So this is something that you can't talk about too much because they would always say, well, in a certain case, you need to do it faster. It's a matter of, in my state of Oklahoma, you can get it done in hours. In North Dakota, you can get permitting done in an average of about 10 days. But no, it's 300 days on federal lands. I have a friend named Harold Hamm. Harold Hamm arguably is the most successful independent producer in America today. He's from Enid, Oklahoma. He does most of his production in North Dakota right now. And I saw just a minute ago the senator from North Dakota, and he can be very proud of the fact that in North Dakota, Harold Hamm has one huge problem, and that is he can't find people to work. They have full employment up there. This is what the potential is for this entire country. Put the chart up there, and I'll show you. This chart shows all the potential, and I call the attention to the chair of this northeastern part of the United States, Pennsylvania and New York. That didn't used to be the case where they had all that potential there. They do now. And so it's spread evenly throughout the country of all the great new discoveries that are out there. Anyway, one of the arguments that the president has had when I have said over and over again for the last 4 years that we need to open up our public lands for drilling, and if we are able to do this, really good things would happen in terms of the market and the price of gas at the pumps. And yet the president has always said, well, if we do that, if we allow the drilling for gas and oil on public lands, it would be 10 years before you'd feel that at the pump. 10 years. So I called up Harold Hamm. Harold Hamm is the guy that I think everyone would agree could be considered the most knowledgeable person on this area. And I said, now, I'm going to be on a national TV show. I should tell you what it is, but I won't tonight. This was about 6 months ago. I said, the president has been saying it'll take 10 years before that market to reach the pumps. And I'd like to ask you a question, Harold Hamm. I said, now when you answer, I'm going to use your name live on national TV tonight to make sure you're accurate. And so I said, if you were set up in New Mexico and you had a rig set up and you were able to lift the restriction we have on public lands, how long would it take that oil and gas to hit the market? And he said, without hesitating, he said 70 days. I said, be sure you're right now. I'm going to use your name. He said, yeah. And he outlined what would happen each day for that first barrel of oil to actually reach the pumps and have an effect. Well, anyway, no one has argued with that yet because it's pretty well documented. So by the time you have one federal drilling permit completed, Harold Hamm could have 4 separate wells up and running, providing more jobs and cheaper gasoline for all Americans. Fortunately, the president does not control the permitting process on state and private lands, and because of this, industry has had the opportunity to unlock tremendous natural gas resources. Not 5 years ago, many believed that the United States faced a significant shortage of natural gas. Wellhead prices were at that time trading as high as $11 a thousand cubic feet. $11 a thousand cubic feet. Investors were racing to build liquefied natural gas import facilities. We were going to import. Now, as you know, in natural gas, you have to liquefy it and have some bulk before you're able to trade it internationally. Well, anyway, they were racing to try to get this done so that we'd be able to import from foreign countries our foreign supplies. The shale gas revolution has changed all of this. Now our expected natural gas reserves are well over 2 quadrillion cubic feet, which is enough gas to supply our domestic needs here in the United States of America for 90 years. That's right here in this country. Many industry observers believe this estimate is discounted to the nation's true potential. This dramatic shift in natural gas markets has pushed prices down to below $4 a thousand cubic feet, putting the United States in a unique position to bolster both wealth creation and our foreign policy, might by beginning natural gas exports. So we'd be going from importing liquefied natural gas to exporting natural gas. Right now, there are currently 15 permits to export LNG pending before the Secretary Chu in the Department of Energy. The Natural Gas Act requires the department to issue such a permit upon application unless it will not be consistent with the public's interest. Well, what could be inconsistent with this for the public interest? This is something that would be cheaper gas for us, give us total independence in a matter of weeks. Congress, when it wrote the Natural Gas Act, understood that the export of American products is good for the nation. It supports domestic industry, it creates jobs, it transfers wealth from overseas back to the United States. It's all good for us. A recent report commissioned by DOE to assist in making its determination agreed with this. They stated, and I'm reading now from the DOE report, they said, quote, across the scenarios examined by the study, the U.S. economic welfare consistently increases as the volume of natural gas exports increases. So that's the opportunity that's out there. Some in this body have raised concerns about allowing liquefied natural gas exports to move forward. They are concerned mainly that production will not be able to keep up with the rising consumption and exports, and the following on effects will be harmful to domestic industries. I can appreciate where these members are coming from, but I want to point out something that many may be overlooking. The Energy Information Agency, that's the EIA, released an annual outlook for U.S. energy markets. In the most recent one, which came out just a few weeks ago, they estimated that between now and 2040, production of natural gas would increase by 40%, which will more than offset the expected 20% increase in consumption. So our consumption is going to increase. So people say, how can we ever become independent? Because our production will increase at twice the consumption level. Now today, the natural gas is trading near an all-time low, and because of this, many producers have completely abandoned new natural gas production products. In 2008, when natural gas was trading at nearly $11 per 1,000 cubic feet, there were over 1,600 active drilling rigs. Today, that figure is down to 428. We've gone from 1,600 rigs down to 400. That's a 73% reduction. The rigs are still out there. They're still set up. They're just not operating. So overnight, you could have them operating again. Industry is not moving forward with projects because it does not have the demand, certainty that it needs to do so. Without demand certainty, it is impossible to accurately forecast whether the massive investments required to develop a project can be recouped. This stalls both job and wealth creation, keeping our unemployment rates and deficits higher than they should be. But today, the natural gas market is in a demand limited scenario, and it will remain there for the foreseeable future. Supply is truly so abundant and readily available that as soon as more demand comes online, producers are able to tap the reserves and meet the market's needs. The consulting firm Deloitte agrees. In its liquefied natural gas report, it stated that, and I'm quoting now, producers can develop more reserves in anticipation of demand growth. They added that the future LNG exports will have limited disruptions to natural gas markets because they will, and I'm quoting again, and this is a Deloitte firm, they will likely be backed by long-term supply contracts as well as long-term contracts with buyers. There will be ample notice and time in advance for the exports to make supplies available. This should be of great encouragement to domestic energy consumers. In fact, the NERA consulting report concluded that across the board, industries would not be hurt by LNG exports, stating that, quote, no sector analyzed would experience reductions in employment and more rapid than normal turnover. The petrochemical industry is one that's been vocal in opposing the LNG exports, but the left-wing think tank, the Brookings Institute, stated the LNG report is, using their language, report that exports can be seen as providing a benefit to the petrochemical industry because it is primarily a user of natural gas liquids and not the dry liquids used to make LNG. Now, I can appreciate the fact that many people are worried about the cost of energy going up in this country. I am too. But those who are concerned, the exports will be the cause of this have misplaced concerns. Rather, they should be focusing their attention on the cumulative effect of adverse government policies negatively affecting energy sources. Government regulations, largely those out of the EPA, are perhaps the greatest threat to this nation's achieving domestic energy independence. I'll repeat, you know, the figure that we use, we've gone down from 1,600 rigs out there that were operating down to 428 rigs. And further, when considering the potential benefits of LNG exports, we can't dismiss the impact trade has had in other sectors of the economy. Agriculture is a prime example. The federal government works diligently to open and maintain international market access for U.S. agricultural producers. This was highlighted very recently by the announcement that Japan would ease its restrictions. They have restrictions now on beef imports. Certainly that's meaningful to my state and the state of others who are in this in the chamber right now. But they have announced that Japan would ease its restrictions on U.S. beef imports. This has been a major goal of the current and previous administrations for years, and Japan's decision was hailed by administration and many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. Everyone knows it's a great deal because when you sell products abroad, you both generate wealth at home and expand the size of the market, thereby increasing opportunities for expansion. The federal government should adopt the same perspective with LNG exports. LNG exports will create jobs across the country and bring more wealth to our nation from abroad and grow our economy, all at the same time. Meanwhile, we'll be providing needed fuel for our allies like Japan and Korea, NATO and Thailand, who consequently will be able to reduce their reliance on the Middle East. So it's something that is good for everybody. It's good for our country. It's good for our economy. And all you have to do is look, if you want to see that, look up to North Dakota. As I mentioned, a great independent producer, Harold Hamm from Oklahoma, is up there right now, and his biggest problem is they're full. They don't have employment. They're fully employed. We have kind of the same situation in my state of Oklahoma. We've expanded our production to the point where we're not feeling some of the grief and the discussion that we hear from other people on this floor. So I would encourage us to look at this export, to keep this market, to get those other 1,600 wells working, and this is something that can certainly happen. I want to mention one other thing. I just noticed my time is expiring, but I want to mention something that came out of the State of the Union message, and hopefully I'll have a chance to do this later on today. But when the President was talking about his greenhouse gas thing that he's been talking about for a long time, he made several comments. I think that this was talked about more in the State of the Union message than anything else that he talked about. He said, yes, it's true that no single event makes a trend, but the fact is that the 12 hottest years on record have all come in the last 15. And that's just flat wrong. Even NASA's James Hansen, who officially has been the leader of the other side of this issue, is one that said he admits that global temperature standstill is real. Mean global temperatures have been flat for the last decade. Now, later on, I'm going to go over one by one the statements that he's made. I would only suggest this, and this is something that you need to keep in mind. In 1895, we went into this hysteria, and at that time it's because there was a cold. So we're all going to freeze to death. Another ice age was coming. We're all going to die. Then again in 1920, it was the same thing came, except it was another problem that they were saying was happening now, another heat spell. Well, this obviously wasn't true at that time, but everyone was hysterical. In 1945, we had another change, and these 20-year cycles keep coming and going. You can set your watch by them, except this time, in 1945, is another cold spell that lasted until 1975. Well, the interesting thing about this is, in 1945, that was the year that had the largest release of CO2 of any time in the history of this country, and that precipitated not a warming trend, but another cold trend. And the warming trend, of course, came in 1975. Anyway, these are cycles. God's still up there. We're going to have these cycles take place. And later on today, hopefully, I want to take each statement that the president made and show that those statements just weren't right. One thing that is true, one thing that no one disagrees with, and that is that the cost of having some type of a cap and trade system that the president wants would be between $300 and $400 billion a year. And by the admission of the director of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, the past director, when I asked the question, I said, you know, if we were to incur all these taxes, would this have something we do in the United States affect the release of CO2 worldwide? And she said no, because the problem isn't here. The problem's in China. The problem's in India and other places. So, again, for those who really believe that CO2 is causing global warming or other climate disasters, keep in mind, even the EPA director appointed by President Obama agrees that that would not reduce any CO2 worldwide. With that, I'll yield the floor.
The Republican whip.
Madam President, I'd ask unanimous consent that following my remarks, the Senator from Kentucky, Senator Paul, be recognized.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'm not sure where the Obama administration is getting all of its talking points on the sequester, but the President might want to consider hiring a fact checker. Even before the sequester took effect, Education Secretary Arne Duncan declared that school teachers were getting pink slips. A few days later, he had to walk those comments back. He said he was referring to a single school in West Virginia, but when the Washington Post contacted the superintendent of that school, he said that not one teacher had gotten a pink slip because of the sequester. Then President Obama suggested that all of the people who keep the Capitol clean would be suffering a pay cut. But that wasn't true either, according to Capitol Superintendent Carlos Elias. We've been repeatedly told that the sequester would trigger drastic layoffs of federal workers. Yet on Monday alone, the federal government posted literally hundreds of job advertisements. Finally, just yesterday, when asked to provide evidence for the claim that 70,000 children would be denied access to Head Start, because of the sequester, the White House had no details. While the president's been out there playing Chicken Little, members of Congress have been waiting for the White House to send over its budget. The law requires the president to transmit a budget by February the 4th, and we've been now advised his budget won't be forthcoming until March the 25th. Ironically, that will actually be after the House and the Senate have taken up our own budget, and we will have no input from the president on his proposal. A few weeks ago, I said that a second term offers the president a second chance, and I still remain hopeful that President Obama will eventually be persuaded to adopt a serious approach for long-term deficit reduction and long-term economic growth. One of the great tragedies in America today is the fact our economy is growing so slowly that unemployment rates remain unacceptably high, roughly around 8%. And that's only after many people have simply given up looking for work. Now more than 20 million people either are out of work or they are working part-time when they would prefer to work full-time. But that's not going to happen until we get the economy growing again. And that's not going to happen until we get our hands around our long-term deficit and economic growth. I realize that the president wants to take, the Democrats want to take the House of Representatives back in 2014. The president probably remembers the halcyon days of 2009 and 2010 when his party controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House. That got us Obamacare, $1 trillion stimulus, and a whole lot more debt, and the Dodd-Frank law, which is was targeted at Wall Street, but which hit Main Street, including a lot of our community bankers. There's a time for campaigning, and there's a time for governing. But the 2012 election occurred 17 weeks ago, and the 2014 election won't occur for another 20 months. Now is the time for governing, not for delivering more partisan stump speeches. And in order to govern, the Senate needs to pass a budget, something this chamber hasn't done for more than 1,400 days. Over that same period, our gross national debt has grown by $5.5 trillion. And we've experienced the weakest economic recovery since the Great Depression. Since the official end of the recession in June of 2009, the median household income in America has fallen by more than $2,400. Meanwhile, since the president took office, the cost of family health insurance has increased by $2,300. So not only is household income for most Americans, the median household income that is, dropped by $2,400, they're seeing an additional burden of $2,300 because of Obamacare. The bottom line is the American people are tired of the Chicken Little stories, and they're tired of the fear-mongering. They look at what's happening in Washington. I know my constituents in Texas do, and they almost want to turn their eyes in another direction to avert their gaze because they understand that Washington is not serving their interests. If President Obama wants real change, it's time for him to get behind real tax reform and real reform of Social Security and Medicare, something his own bipartisan fiscal commission, Simpson-Bowles, recommended. After all, the American people didn't send us here to kick and scream over a 2.4% budget cut. They sent us here to make some hard decisions that are necessary to ensure long-term fiscal health and long-term economic prosperity. And it's time for the President, as the leader of our country and the leader of the free world, to take that message to heart. Madam President, I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Kentucky.
I rise today to begin to filibuster John Brennan's nomination for the CIA. I will speak until I can no longer speak. I will speak as long as it takes until the alarm is sounded from coast to coast that our Constitution is important, that your rights to trial by jury are precious, that no American should be killed by a drone on American soil without first being charged with a crime, without first being found to be guilty by a court, that Americans could be killed in a cafe in San Francisco or in a restaurant in Houston or at their home in Bowling Green, Kentucky, is an abomination. It is something that should not and cannot be tolerated in our country. I don't rise to oppose John Brennan's nomination simply for the person. I rise today for the principle. The principle is one that as Americans we have fought long and hard for, and to give up on that principle, to give up on the Bill of Rights, to give up on the Fifth Amendment protection that says that no person shall be held without due process, that no person shall be held for a capital offense without being indicted. This is a precious American tradition and something we should not give up on easily. They say Lewis Carroll is fiction. Alice never fell down a rabbit hole, and the White Queen's caustic judgments are not really a threat to your security. Or has America the Beautiful become Alice's Wonderland? No, no, said the Queen. Sentence first, verdict afterwards. Stuff and nonsense, Alice said loudly. The idea of having the sentence first? Hold your tongue, said the Queen, turning purple. I won't, said Alice. Release the drones, said the Queen, as she shouted at the top of her voice. Lewis Carroll is fiction, right? When I asked the President, can you kill an American on American soil, it should have been an easy answer. It's an easy question. It should have been a resounding and unequivocal no. The President's response? He hasn't killed anyone yet. We're supposed to be comforted by that. The President says, I haven't killed anyone yet. He goes on to say, and I have no intention of killing Americans, but I might. Is that enough? Are we satisfied by that? Are we so complacent with our rights that we would allow a president to say he might kill Americans, but he will judge the circumstances? He will be the sole arbiter. He will be the sole decider. He will be the executioner in chief if he sees fit. Now, some would say he would never do this. Many people give the president they give him consideration. They say he's a good man. I'm not arguing that he's not. What I'm arguing is that the law is there and set in place for the day when angels don't rule government. Madison said that the restraint on government was because government will not always be run by angels. This has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with whether the president is a Democrat or a Republican. Were this a Republican president, I'd be here saying exactly the same thing. No one person, no one politician should be allowed to judge the guilt, to charge an individual, to judge the guilt of an individual, and to execute an individual. It goes against everything that we fundamentally believe in our country. This isn't even new to our country. There's 800 years of English law that we found our tradition upon. We found it upon the Magna Carta from 1215. We found it upon Morgan of Glamorgan from 725 A.D. We found it upon the Greeks and Romans who had juries. It is not enough to charge someone to say that they are guilty. Now, some might come to this floor and they might say, well, what if we're being attacked on 9/11? What if there are planes flying at the Twin Towers? Obviously, we repel them. We repel any attack on our country. If there's a gentleman or a woman with a grenade launcher attacking our buildings or our Capitol, we use lethal force. You don't get due process if you're involved with actively attacking us, our soldiers, or our government. You don't get due process if you're overseas in a battle shooting at our soldiers. But that's not what we're talking about. The Wall Street Journal reported and said that the bulk of the drone attacks are signature attacks. They don't even know the name of the person. A line or a caravan is going from a place where we think there are bad people to a place where we think they might commit harm, and we kill the caravan, not the person. Is that the standard that we will now use in America? Will we use a standard for killing Americans to be that we thought you were bad, we thought you were coming from a meeting with bad people, and you were in a line of traffic, and so therefore you were fined for the killing? That is the standard we're using overseas. Is that the standard we're going to use here? I will speak today until the president responds and says, no, we won't kill Americans in cafes. No, we won't kill you at home in your bed at night. No, we won't drop bombs on restaurants. Is that so hard? It's amazing that the president will not respond. I've been asking this question for a month. It's like pulling teeth to get the president to respond to anything. And I get no answer. The president says he hasn't done it yet, and I'm to be comforted. You are to be comforted in your home. You are to be comforted in your restaurant. You are to be comforted online, communicating in your email that the president hasn't killed an American yet on the homeland. He says he hasn't done it yet. He says he has no intention to do so. Hayek said that nothing distinguishes arbitrary government from a government that is run by the whims of the people than the rule of law. The law is an amazingly important thing, an amazingly important protection. And for us to give up on it so easily really doesn't speak well of what our founding fathers fought for, what generation after generation of American soldiers have fought for, what soldiers are fighting for today when they go overseas to fight wars for us. It doesn't speak well of what we're doing here to protect the freedom at home. When our soldiers are abroad fighting for us, that we say that our freedom's not precious enough for one person to come down and say, enough's enough, Mr. President. Come clean, come forward and say you will not kill Americans on American soil. The oath of office of the President says that he will, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He raises his hand, his right hand, and puts his left hand on the Bible, and he says, I will. The President doesn't say, I intend to, if it's convenient. I intend to, unless circumstances dictate otherwise. The President says, I will defend the Constitution. I will protect the Constitution. There isn't room for equivocation here, Mr. President. This is something that is so important, so fundamental to our country, that he needs to come forward. When Brennan, whose nomination I'm posing today, was asked directly, is there any limit to your killing? Is there any geographic limitation to your drone strike program? Brennan responded and said no. There is no limitation. So the obvious question would be, if there's no limitation to whom you can kill and where you can kill, and there's no due process upon whom you will kill, does that mean you will do it in America? So the senator from Oregon asked him that question directly in committee. And this so-called champion of transparency, this so-called advocate of some kind of process, responded to the senator from Oregon by saying, I plan to optimize secrecy and optimize transparency. Gobbledygook. You were asked, will you kill Americans on American soil? Answer the question. Our laws forbid the CIA from doing that. It should have been an easy question. The 1947 National Security Act says the CIA doesn't operate in our country. We have the FBI. We have rules. We've separated powers to protect your rights. That's what government was organized to do. That's what the Constitution was put in place to do, to protect your rights. So when asked, he says, no answer. He says, I will evade your answer. And by letting him come forward, we let him get away with it. So I have hounded and hounded and hounded, and finally yesterday I get a response from Mr. Brennan, who wishes to be the CIA chief, and he finally says, I will obey the law. Well, hooray. Good for him. It took a month to get him to admit that he will obey the law. But it's not so simple. You see, the drone strike program is under the Department of Defense. So when the CIA says they're not going to kill you in America, they're not saying the Defense Department won't. So Eric Holder sent a response, the Attorney General, and his response says, haven't killed anyone yet. I don't intend to kill anyone, but I might. And he pulls out examples that really aren't under consideration. There is the use of lethal force that can always be repelled. If our country is attacked, the president has the right to defend and protect the country. Nobody questions that. Nobody questions if planes are flying towards the Twin Towers, whether they can be repulsed by the military. Nobody questions whether a terrorist with a rocket launcher or a grenade launcher is attacking us, whether they can be repelled. They don't get their day in court. But if you are sitting in a cafeteria in Dearborn, if you happen to be an Arab American who has a relative in the Middle East and you communicate with them by email, and somebody says, oh, your relative is someone we suspect of being associated with terrorism, is that enough to kill you? For goodness sakes, wouldn't we try to arrest and come to the truth by having a jury and a presentation of facts on both sides of the issue? See, the real problem here, one of the things we did a long time ago,